Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. My name is Lisa and we're back for another day working on the stitch sampler. Today we're continuing our journey with buttonhole or blanket stitch, and we're going to be doing some curved variations today. Let's get stitching. Today I have my circle template because we're going to be doing circular variations of buttonhole stitch. I also have my purple air and water erasable ink. I like this one because it's temporary. I've never had any trouble with it coming out of cotton fabrics. I have another 5 seam block in my frame today. This is one of those where I kind of made a mistake in my piecing. I've got one really long one and then one really short one. So I'm going to use a slightly smaller seam here. And I think we may actually start with that one because I want the other seams to be able to work around that one if I can. So we are 1.5 inches long. Let's use some 1/2 inch circles and we're going to be marking on here. I'm using these halfway marks as a guide. So there we go. We have 3 arches. We're going to be doing buttonhole that comes off of it in this direction. Because these are so tiny, we're not going to do so many marks. So let's maybe do 3 off of each one, something like that. And that will make it simpler and a little bit easier. So what thread do we want to use? Let's use this one that's a little bit darker. And I am going to start over here. Like we normally would, I'm going to go down at the top. We're going to come back up on the arch. With only 3 stitches on these, we could do 4. Let's try 4 here and see how that goes. I'm not measuring these because measuring around curves is not always easy. I don't want them parallel to one another because they're going to radiate off of that curve. And so I'm just sort of eyeballing what I think looks like a nice even arrangement coming around. And the reason I'm not going to do one down here is because it would interfere with the next arch. So in this case, I'm just going to do 3 like this. And I'm going to come over a thread, and I'm actually going to cross over that bottom. And I'm thinking about where I want that next one. And I don't want these to kiss on the top. So I'm going to separate them just a little bit. But if you had a bigger curve, you've got a little more leeway for what you're doing than when you have this tiny curve. So down at the top, up at the base. Actually finished that one on the upper block. So now we're going to come out here. I don't want them to kiss. We can give ourselves a little bit of leeway. I'm still going to use that mark I put in, but the next one I'm not going to follow what I already did. These are not radiating quite as well as I would have liked, but I think that's because we're working on such a small arch. This is a great traditional buttonhole stitch to do these little arches. And a lot of people will call this a dipped eyelash or a curved buttonhole, either one. So there we are, 3 little arches that are curved. The next one, we're going to use it sort of alternating, and so it's going to go up and down and curve along the seam. Let's actually do this long seam here. I think that would be a good one. Since we're working on a longer seam, I want a good long piece of thread. As I work my sampler, I'm just trying to balance these threads. I have this thread that's got a little more peachy or coral tone to it. And then let's think about these arcs that we're going to be doing. Now on this particular one, I don't want them to be quite as steep as this. So I want to use more of a partial one. I want them to be a little bit bigger, and I know I want to go around this, so I want to go this way, around, and then we're just going to keep going down with whatever we do. And I'm looking at this thinking that I'm going to do something like that. Let's use this 7/8 inch circle. I'm going to make some marks there. And then I'm going to be putting that over here as well. So we're going to, oops, and I need to actually rotate that to get my marks in the right place. And then rotate it. Remember that you're going to be drawing inside of that line, so it's not as big as the actual opening in the template is. My marks are fading off the template already. And that takes us up that whole seam, so that's good. This one, instead of coming out kind of angled or radiating around it, we're going to come off so that the stitches are straight one way or the other. And it doesn't matter which side I start on. So I'm actually going to start closest to me. I'm going to start out past my seam. So this one we're going to come off, and there's no point in doing any out here. So I'm going to go ahead and start up a little bit, and we're going to do these a little over 1/8 of an inch up. And so I'm going to come down straight here. Remember, I've got to go over my thread, and then we're going to come up. If you're having trouble figuring out where do I go, bring your thread down, hold it down so you can see, and come up just inside it on your line. And so I'm looking at how far apart I am. I want to keep going that way. Let's just go ahead and bring it down so you can see where that is. And we're just going to keep working away around. So needle goes down on top, comes up on the bottom, just inside your thread on the line. I feel like that one could probably have been just a smidgen longer, but that's all right. It'll all work out in the end. So keeping them parallel to one another. That one's a little further apart. It's probably not going to matter in the overall scheme of things. A little twist in the thread on the bottom there, so just untwisting that. And I think we can do one more of those in here. Again, we're trying to keep it mostly perpendicular and parallel. And now we need to turn and focus our direction on the other side. So I'm going to go up to what would be the top of the stitch and come down. And so it's going to come down almost opposite the previous stitch. You can see that there. And now we're going to come up trying to keep them about the same length, but again, coming down just inside. And we're just going to keep doing that all the way across. Now, think about variations with a stitch like this. You don't have to do the branches on the outside of the curve. You could do them on the inside of the curve. So don't stitch through it, stitch just inside it. Move it out of the way once you know your spot. And I pulled that too tight, so just loosen it up. And we're going to make one more here. Move that thread out of the way. Now we're going to go down at the top of that stitch. I had to stop and think for a moment. You know, even as much as I stitch, I still sometimes get a little confused myself. So be patient with yourself on these. So it's that change of direction kind of made me lose track of where I was at and what I was doing. And so when I was stitching the other way, it was easier to figure out where that parallel was. And so if you're working in hand in a hoop or just without a frame or anything, it's really easy to just turn it around and stitch it going the other way. But since I'm stitching in this frame for you, we're just going to keep going here. And once you get the hang of it, it really does go pretty quick. Just watch yourself at those direction changes. And remember, you always are going down at the top and up at your bottom line. And keep that coming up and down, straight up and down. Probably could have done a better job on that one. That's all right. This is the one where I was going to get confused. So we're coming across and come up at the line. Go down at the top. Up at the line. And with a seam like this one, there's so much that you can do with it to expand it and turn it into a fancier seam. And so I encourage you to play with location of French knots or even other stitches, putting detached chain stitches or lazy daisies off the top of it. There are a lot of fun things that you could do with it. So again, we made our direction change, so I went down at the top, come up at the bottom, and check my placement. So on this, where I'm lining up is really not with the curve, but think about running these little verticals perpendicular to our seam line. That's kind of where I'm aiming for, to make sure everything is lining up where I want it. And then you can pull it down check your placement. Sorry, I think that's kind of in the shadow here. I keep trying different lighting positions and I'm just not sure here what is best. So we'll just keep going with it and hope that it all works out. Now in an ideal world, you're going to have the same number of spokes on each one. This one I have 7. I have 7 here, I have 6 here, I have 6 here, and it looks like I'm going to probably get 6 on this one as well, if I'm careful here. So that's another thing to watch for, and that's something that I could have done a little better job with watching for. I was just too busy trying to stitch. And so I'm going to continue off as though I was stitching the next one to continue that over my seam line. And we're going to just say that comes out there. And now I'm just going to go over there and end it off in my seam allowance, and I'll knot it off on that side. So I'm pretty happy with that one. I think that turned out pretty well. I really like that color thread with this fabric as well. So there's 2 variations. Let's come and do a third one. I'm thinking we do need to go back to this one. I'd kind of like to do something that's a lot bigger. This is just not working for me. I'm going to get out some of my templates here, and I want to use templates that I know you can get. Let me show you one of my favorite templates is this one. I like that really shallow curve, but you can't get these anymore. Let's try this Sashiko curve. That actually works pretty well. So this is a Sashiko template. I know it's really hard to see. I would really rather have it be just a little smaller, but I think we're going to get 2 good curves out of that, and that actually might be just perfect. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can kind of pretend it comes off slightly on the underside of that and then goes back. I do want my pink thread. We're going to be doing an angled buttonhole as we work on this particular seam. It doesn't really matter where I start. It's going to start off the same way. Since I did that Sashiko template, it's got the little dashes. I can use that and make my angles off of each one of those. So that's actually turned out to be sort of a nice extra here. We're coming up at the bottom and we're going down at the top. Standard buttonhole. And we're going to come up on that line at the end of that dash. And now we're going to go up. And we're going to come up here. So we're doing that angled buttonhole. Come back at the end of my dash. Then we're going to go up. And I'm going to come up at the end of that dash. So there should be lots of consistency here. You're just thinking about that angle that you're making and trying to be as consistent as possible with it, going around a curve. If it's not perfect, you know, the reality is that nobody's going to know that except you. And we're going to actually line right up with that one. And I'm off a little bit on spacing here. I can see that. And so we're going to go down there because we're kind of running into that other one, and I would really like to come up here. I'm trying to work around this other seam a little bit. We're going to go down there. I want to come up at the end of that dash, which is right about there. I'm going to go over here. Come up at the end of the dash. Over here. End of the dash. Over here. Come up end of the dash. Come up over here. Come up end of the dash. The Sashiko template actually is turning out to be a really wonderful template. I'm really happy with that. And come up at the end of that dash. I've not ever tried to use it for buttonhole stitch before. And then I'm just going to come down to where that ended. And then I'm going to come up, not in the same hole, or I'll pull the stitch out, and then it would be as though I'm coming up here. I'm going to, even though it's over the seam line, I'm going to finish my stitch just in case some of that shows when we sew through it. Come up at the end of the dash, and we're going to just pretend that goes off right there and call that one quits. And so there we have our angled eyelash stitch. The next one that we're going to do is basically this. We're going to stitch it as though it alternates, and then we're going to stitch two of those. So we're going to stitch this like this, and we're going to do that along here, and then we're going to come back and do it opposite so we get this nice interwoven stitch. And I think we're going to use the variegated green and pink thread for that one. I think that's going to look nice. I really do love this one. And then let's mark. Do we want to do that same marking? It fits perfectly. Let's just go ahead and mark with that same one. It'll bring a little continuity to the block. The only issue I have with the Sashiko template is it doesn't have a hole here at the end. So I'm going to mark both sides of this at the same time, because this one we want to make sure it's really continuous. So I'm actually going to bring it down just a little bit. And then let's continue that off the edge here, just so we have that continuity to go with. I'm going to go ahead and start down here on my seam line. And we're going to come up, coming off. Come up on that line. And come up here. So we're doing exactly the same stitch we just did, but we're just going to overlap them and get this nice doubled seam. And with the variegated thread, that adds even more interest to it. Now this one, I'm going to just keep going there, but now we're crossing over, and so we're actually switching direction. So coming back up at the line, going down over there, come up at the line, And we're going to do that same thing over here that we did on the other corner. Then we're going to come out here and just want to finish that stitch off in case I'm over the line for some reason. Alright, and now we're going to end that one. I lost another bit of footage, so I pulled out the stitching I had done so I can refilm it for you. I'm not sure what the issue was, but we're just going to keep going. I'm still fighting this cold. On this one, we went up this direction, and now we're going to do this other side, but I didn't want to come back down this side because then that would put the barbs going the other direction, and I don't really care for that look personally. I mean, it probably depends on the project and what exactly it is you're doing, but I really want them to angle up at roughly the same direction. I'm going to start back down at the bottom. I knotted off my thread. I was looking at this and thinking, I feel like it really needs to come up just a little bit. Now, when we did this transition here, we just made one long thread. So I can definitely do that. So it would be coming to right about here. I want to try and keep these relatively even going across. And so I'm going to come and go this direction. So again, we're going out. So there's my base and my top. We're going to put out here. Come back up. Fairly even. Let's check that. And then again, I'm going to mark. Where's my base? I just sort of have to visually mark that, and then I'm going to be up about so. That might be out just a little far. We'll see how it goes. It's a sampler. It's a learning piece, so I'm not going to be too strict with it. I'm going to just accommodate for what I think the correction should be, and I might have pulled that just a little tight. There, I think that's better. Make sure we're stitching over our thread. And now I'm going to make one right up in here. And it can be nice if you can kind of match with what's going on here. And then we're going to come up. So here's where we would be. So I'm going to come here. Let's come back in here. So I realized I sort of radiated that first one, and in reality I kind of wish I had taken it out just a little further. But it is what it is, so I'm going to come back that again, try and line up pretty close to where the opposite one is. It may not be exact, but you know, it'll be close enough. So I'm going to come up just a little above it. And we're just doing the same thing all the way around this curve. And I'm going to take it off in here. So once again, what you see in the final pictures of the block that I filmed earlier are going to look slightly different. And I'm just going to take this off in the same direction, and then we'll knot it off. And so then we have that seam done. That is that nice curve with the eyelash buttonhole on it. And I'm pretty happy with that one. I use this one quite a bit, and I love that you can embellish in the centers of that. That works out really nice. And you can certainly embellish off the tips of it as well. So I'm turning this around to make it easier for me to stitch, because I'm going to stitch on this last seam that we have. For this one, it's going to be a little different than the ones we've done so far, because so far we've always put our legs of the buttonhole on the outside of the curve.
And this time we're going to put it on the inside of the curve. So let's see how long of a seam we have to work with here. It's not terribly long. I'm going to just mark every 1/8 of an inch on this one, because we're going to be stitching toward this center seam. I've just tipped my pen straight up and down and make a little twisting motion to make my mark. You end up with much more accurate marks that way. And then we're going to get our circle template out again. We want to begin and end on our marks. So I'm just going to adjust the circle template to accommodate that. And we're going to go here. So we're not going to get 3 full patterns on this one. I'm guessing we're going to be 2.5 here. And again, I'm trying to line up with where I think my marks would be. Okay, we're actually going to get 3 on that one. That's great. You know, it doesn't matter which direction you start from, whichever way you're comfortable going. We know where we're going with it. And so I am just going to start down here. I'm starting out in the seam line. Here's my basting line. Here's my blue line. So I'm about 1/8 of an inch away. That way when I put the blocks together, I'm not going to be catching that knot in. Let me think about this. I may not want to do that one there. Yeah, I need to move that slightly. It's not going to quite work from where I put it. I'm going to start up here at the top. And we're starting here because we don't want to interfere with this seam. Now on this one, I've put my marks at 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to consider this the top. You know, all the other stitches I'm saying, go to the top, go to the top. And this is going to be the end of our leg here. So I can do that. And then what I'm doing is I want this thread to be perpendicular to that seam. So I'm going to come up on that curve. And then we're going to keep doing that all the way down. Now my mark is already faded. I'm just going to kind of eyeball where I think it is. Go perpendicular. Come just inside of that. Go down. Again. Go perpendicular. Now be really careful with these and make sure you're coming up inside of that thread, because if you push it too far to the outside, then they will slant and this won't look nearly as nice. Your thread becomes your tool to keep your lines nice and straight. And then this one, rather than trying to go down here, we are just going to go down right there. Now I'm going to come back up just a thread away. In an ideal world, it would be connected. I find that I don't like it when it's too long of a line here. I think it distorts. So I'm looking here at where we're going. So again, I'm going down at the top of my leg. And we're going to come back, come up on the inside. So you can see on these types of stitches, it doesn't matter if you're right or left-handed, because you're going to be working in all directions on these. Sorry, just got to hold that thread out perpendicular. And down. Threads out perpendicular. And by marking that 1/8 inch marking and then making our circles, they're going to end up nice and even and consistent from each arc to the next one. And then again, I'm going to come, see, I could come all the way here, but then I kind of lose some of that curve. So think of it even almost like a little outline stitch here. And I'm going to come up. Let me show you here. I'm actually trying to come up, and I'm going to go under that thread, and we'll see if that will help pull that thread over to maintain our line just slightly better. And then we're going to go down at that dot. I'm going as close to that seam as I can go. So I'm not necessarily right on my dot. My dot just tells me where the spacing is. So here's my dot. It's a little ways away. I'm going right up against that seam. Hold it out perpendicular. I think that last one I got a little bit slanted. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we have one more in here. Just to make it look properly finished. And I'm coming out into my seam area, and I'll make my knot out here. So let me turn that over and make a knot, and then we'll take a look at it. So here is our finished block. I did make a template, so we can put that over and see the actual finished block without all the extra fabric around it, so you can kind of see how it's going to go together. I'm realizing on this block, it really got a little bit lopsided. But you know, I don't think that's going to make a big difference, because I think when we start putting these blocks together, they're all going to come in and fit. Here's our other block we have finished. See, I look at that one and I say, okay, well that lines up too much, so let's turn that. You can play with it and see, find the balance that you like with it. You can see all of a sudden this block doesn't look nearly so big, and it all is balancing really nice. In fact, that piece is probably about the same size as this one, and it's going to look great. I think it's going to balance beautifully. I'm really pleased with how it's looking together. I hope you've enjoyed coming along today and experimenting with all of these curved buttonhole varieties. We have the dipped ones where they're all on one side of the seam. Then we have the curved ones, and then the interlaced ones where they're weaving together. And then this one where we've worked towards the inside instead of towards the outside. And I'll make sure I'm marking all the names of these on the video here so you can see the true names of these seams if there is one. I did find that there isn't always an official name for these stitches. I'm really happy with it. I'm really pleased with the way it's coming. And these are fun stitches. I use these all the time. I love stitching these curved buttonhole stitches. It's just such a wonderful pattern. Hope you learned something new, and thanks for coming along today. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope that you're having fun stitching along with me on these sampler stitches. I'd love to hear what has been your favorite one to stitch so far. I wish you a beautiful day, happy stitching, and I will see you in the next video.